Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm going to do a longer narrated video of this drawing of Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings. And this is a slightly older drawing of mine. I did this a couple of years ago and I already made a shorter video with some music, and I'm going to put the link in the description so that you can check that out as well. But this time I wanted to do a slightly longer video where I can maybe explain some of the things I did during the drawing process. This was all done in charcoal on paper that is about 11 times 14 inches in size. And for these larger dark areas I just used the pieces of my pencil. I kind of used them as a charcoal stick to drag them across the surface and cover these larger areas very quickly, and then I did a lot of the blending with my finger. But for the rest of the drawing process I used the charcoal pencil. It's a Kohinoor Gioconda charcoal pencil, and in addition to that I used some of the blending and erasing tools. So now we're going to get to the drawing process and I'm going to show you how I did it. Let's have a look. I already had a sketch in place, and I did the sketch with a combination of tracing and freehand, and after that I started using those bits of charcoal to cover some of these larger areas of the background. And for those lines around the sword where I needed a little bit more precision, I used the charcoal pencil, obviously. So like I said, the charcoal pencil I'm using is a Kohinoor Gioconda extra charcoal pencil. And the good thing about it is that it can be sharpened pretty well, even though it's pretty soft. So it allows you to create some dark areas, but at the same time it can be sharpened pretty well. The paper I'm using here I think is 11 times 14 inches Strathmore 400 series. I'm not really sure, but it worked pretty well. So as you can see, I covered the background and now I'm moving on to the sword. And the thing about drawing swords or any other objects made out of metal is that you have to understand that you have to create areas of high contrast, and you have to keep your edges clean, obviously. Now my edges are not perfect here because I did a lot of this in freehand, but since it is a broken sword it doesn't really matter that much, I guess. But as you can see, I'm shading some of these areas on the middle part of the sword so that I can kind of show its shape and explain its shape to the viewer. And I'm adding a little bit more charcoal here and there just to enhance that contrast, because metallic objects are very reflective and shiny. And I'm sorry about my head butting in occasionally. I'm also using a pencil eraser to clean up the edges, and another tool that I'm using is a tortillon. Tortillon allows you to do some finer blending, and it can also be used as a drawing tool when it picks up a little bit of charcoal. So like I said, for drawing those lighter shapes and the edges of the sword, because the sword is a lot lighter than the background, I used a pencil eraser, or an eraser in a pencil. It's also a Kohinoor eraser. So that's not a white pencil or anything, it's an eraser. Later I also tried using some white charcoal pencils, but I wasn't really happy with the effects. I mostly stuck to using erasers because I prefer using erasers for lighter shapes. And here, as you can see, I'm doing a little bit more of the background and moving closer to Aragorn's face and the hand. I had to simplify the hand a little bit because I was kind of improvising. I didn't have a single reference photo for this. I used some of the images from the movie and some other stuff and kind of merged these things together because I wanted to create a scene where he is holding up this broken sword, the Narsil. Here I zoomed in a little bit so that you can see how I'm working on some of the details. I'm drawing the eyes, and we're going to have some nice reflections in the eyes, these highlights. And of course, as usual, in order for the reflections in the eye to stand out, you have to shade all around them. You have to shade the entire eyeball, you have to shade the skin around the eye, and that way those highlights will really stand out and appear a lot lighter than the background, and they will appear almost shiny. I'm also shading the hair and the beard around the face because I want to create a nice contrast between the hair on the left and the edge of the face. I'm also making some suggestions of his beard. Here I'm drawing these small strokes, keeping them short so that they kind of look like stubble. And I'm going to draw the mustache and the mouth here. Like I said, I'm only going to be using one pencil for this. I thought that this soft charcoal pencil, in combination with these blending tools such as tortillons and erasers, could allow me for enough precision and detail to pull this off. And this is a larger drawing, so it's not that much of a problem. And you can see how I'm using a tortillon to draw and shade some of the areas. I'm using it instead of using a pencil. Tortillon can be a convenient drawing tool when you don't want to draw lines that are quite as clean or quite as dark as the ones that you would produce with your charcoal pencil. Charcoal pencils are made out of compressed charcoal, and they tend to be a lot darker. I didn't use any vine charcoal here for the lighter shading and the smoother transitions. I mostly used brushes to move the charcoal around because I already had a ton of charcoal laying down on that paper, so why not use it? I zoomed back in again and again. My head is kind of butting in a little bit, but I'm working on the other eye now, and this one is also going to have a bit of a reflection here. And once I finish that, I'm going to start shading around them. So sometimes some artists first shade the larger areas, but I didn't really want to do that because I wanted to preserve the lighter spaces. So I first drew in these darker areas to define some of the basic facial features, and I also reserved some of the white spaces where I really don't want to put any charcoal, and then I started sort of shading around them. The background is pretty dark, as you can see. Now normally I tend to avoid really dark backgrounds, and one of the things to keep in mind when you have such a dark background is that in order to prevent the background from kind of swallowing your main subject, you have to make sure that your main subject has a sufficient amount of value itself, and that you have a nice range of value so that you can show the volume of that subject. And it's also important to create nice contrast between the main subject and the background. So edges will also be very important here. Some of the edges will be a little bit cleaner than the others, so I wanted a really clean edge between that sword and the background. With the hair, it's going to be a little bit different, I guess. So I started shading the area around the eyes, and then I moved on to the forehead, and I used a very soft brush to kind of spread that charcoal around. And like I said, I didn't feel the need to shade too much with a pencil or a tortillon in this phase because I already had a lot of charcoal lying around, and I could just move it around with a pencil. But the thing is that because I started shading around his eyes, he now looks kind of like he has dark circles around the eyes, and he looks really pale. But that's all going to change once I start shading the rest of the face. So he won't look like a drug addict or somebody who hasn't slept in a few days. Even though Aragorn, I guess, is supposed to look kind of rough and grim. This picture of Aragorn obviously is based on Viggo Mortensen, the actor from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I wanted to use his face as a reference. And here, as you can see, I'm moving on to the neck, which is also going to be pretty dark. There's going to be a lot of shadow under that jaw and the beard. And the lower part of the beard is also going to be a lot darker, mostly because it's darker in terms of color, but it's also thicker, and there's also a bit of shadow under it. So again, I'm using these bits of charcoal, which are basically broken off pieces of my pencil, and I'm using them as charcoal sticks to cover these larger areas quickly, and then I just push the charcoal in with a finger. And I have to tell you, your finger is a great blending tool, whether you're working with pastels or charcoal. It just really covers large areas very, very quickly. The only thing that it lacks, obviously, is precision, but there are ways to work around that, I guess. And now I'm going to start shading the rest of the face a bit more. Again, mostly using the brushes to push the charcoal around, but at the same time using the erasers to correct some of the mistakes and take away a bit of the value where it's not needed. And also I'm going to be using those pencil the pencil eraser to draw some of these flyaway hairs so that they can stand out against the background, to further define his hair. And you can see, kind of as I'm shading the rest of the face and pushing the charcoal around with my brushes, the face is getting a lot darker, but at the same time he doesn't look quite as pale as he did. But now his lips kind of look a bit lighter because of the work I did with the brush, and because I lost some of the contrast, so I have to go in and reinforce some of these areas which are supposed to be darker. And you can also see that I put in a tiny bit of value into those whites of the eyes. I shaded the eyeballs so that the reflection in the eye could stand out. And when you shade the face with a brush, you often lose some of the edges, so I have to go back and work over them with a charcoal pencil. And I'm adding some more details both around the eyebrows and the mouth and the mustache and the beard. And I also added some nice shadows under these bangs on his forehead. So I thought that was a nice detail. Whenever you have a nice shadow like that, you should take that opportunity, because it kind of allows you to add more depth to your drawing, and it helps you create a more 3D looking drawing. And here I used a pencil eraser to clean up the edge of the nose, and to also draw some of these lighter hairs on his beard, and also to make his cheekbones stand out. So here I thought that it was time to tackle the upper edge of his head and hair, and I had to clean it up first so the edges are a little bit more defined in relation to the background. And after that, once I clean up the edge and once I'm happy with the amount of value in it, I'm going to be adding some flyaway hairs and maybe some other details. Now the quality of my footage varies a little bit. That's because I no longer have the raw footage for this video. I was only able to use what I had to create a slightly longer narrated video. But I think that the shorter one with music is also worth watching, so you should check that out as well. I did a series of Lord of the Rings drawings recently, so I thought that it was time to do a longer version of this one, because I had a number of people requesting this. And notice how dark the background is going to be, and also the edges. The rest of his body and the hand is kind of going to be fading into the darkness, so the drawing is almost like a dark vignette where the edges are fading into the dark area of the paper. But I wanted it to look like that. I wanted to create a scene that kind of looked like that scene in Rivendell, where Aragorn is examining the sword, and I wanted to create a slightly darker scene where only his head and face are receiving a little bit more of the light and are kind of popping out of the darkness. So I'm pretty happy with the amount of likeness I achieved on his face, and I'm not really going to do much more work on his face. Now I'm trying to add some more details to his hair and to define some of the edges. You can also see to the left I used that white charcoal pencil to try to draw some details on the hair, but eventually I decided to keep working with this pencil eraser, this Kohinoor pencil eraser, because I just like the effect better. And I only used the white charcoal pencil for some of the blending to create some transitions, but other than that, for the highlights and for the lighter areas, I mostly used an eraser. So once I blended the rest of this background, all I needed to do was kind of figure out how much of the hair and how much of his shirt I wanted to be visible, but I didn't want to do too much. Like I said, I just wanted to have him popping out of the darkness, and this was it. This was what I came up with. Eventually I decided to sign my drawing in the lower left corner, but because I already sprayed it with a fixative, I was kind of unable to erase my signature with a pencil eraser, and then I used a white colored pencil to put down my signature. So that's it. That's the finished drawing. I hope you like this narrated video of my drawing of Aragorn. Don't forget to check out my other Lord of the Rings and Hobbit drawings, and don't forget to check out my other videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.